When you serve as the dean of a law school, there are many opportunities that you have to meet people you didn't know, to make new friends, to preside over events that are feel-good events for your students, for your institution, but really none compares with what Mike Papantonio has done for Temple Law School and the Scheller Center for Social Justice tonight and before, and as we hope going forward in the future. I want to say first a word about the Scheller Center, but you'll hear a little bit more about that. The idea was that there are people who are in need in this country, and they operate in a space where the legal system could provide help for them if someone were there to offer a lending hand. But it's not always the kind of place where practicing lawyers can easily lend a hand, because the work is humongous, the costs are substantial, and the rewards are often very small. And so what we envisioned was a place where law students would get that feeling about what a law license provides to you, which is the opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who might not otherwise be able to take advantage of our legal system. So we're not competing with practicing lawyers. We're trying to operate in the space, in the policy space, in the white paper space, in this space where we can change the way business is done in this commonwealth, in this nation, to advantage the many people who need our help, but who could not otherwise afford it. And on a personal level, part of what I very much hope in thinking about this Scheller Center is that our students who are experiencing this will feel something that they want to replicate when they get into practice. We can't make people care, but we can give people the opportunity to experience how good it feels to care. So our students who have the opportunity to work in the Scheller Center for Social Justice, I think, have the opportunity to recognize that it doesn't take a whole lot in order to make a difference in this world and to elevate the lifestyle and experiences of people less fortunate than us. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Papantonio. I've got 6 cards, and I'm not going to read them all. I couldn't possibly have memorized it. But what I want to tell you are a couple things about Mike. Mike is at the law firm of Levin Papantonio in Florida. That's Levin Papantonio in Florida. Levin is Levin of the University of Florida College of Law. And Florida is, well, a long way from Philadelphia. But Mike has aligned himself with Temple's Scheller Center for Social Justice and Temple Law School because he understands what we are trying to do. We are trying to change the hearts and minds of future lawyers of America by explaining to them how America's justice system works. Both the Scheller Center and the law school align with what Mike Papantonio has done for life. He, like one of our honorees today, is the personification of doing well by doing good. Mike has been the lawyer on over $3 billion of settlements in this country. And what he's done is not gone after the dollar, he's gone after justice. And one of the things that Mike knows that we have tried to do in the Scheller Center in working with our students is to remind them that it's not always just the plaintiffs who are in a position to do justice. If you're a corporate lawyer, if you're the one who's advising a corporation on the right decisions to make, on the honorable choices to make, on the careful decisions that you should make to protect people in America, you are bringing about justice. This is not a plaintiff's organization. This is a justice organization, and that's what Mike has done for life. He is known as Pap to his friends, and I feel like I get to call him Pap, and America's lawyer to many. He's well known to many of you who watch MSNBC, Fox, any of the news stations that talk about justice in America. He has been there. I could regale you longer with his civil accomplishments, but I think I would rather hand the mic to him to let him tell you why he has chosen to help us from such a long distance. Mike, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. Mark Proctor, my partner, Mark, if you'd stand up, please. Mark and I endlessly get the question from our partners down in Florida. The law school at University of Florida is named, we named it after our senior partner, Fred Levin. It's called the Levin College of Law. And so we're constantly asked, what's up? You know, why is it that you go up there to Philadelphia? Why are you so interested in what's happening at Temple University? And I say to them, well, why don't you make a trip with me? Why don't you come with Mark, and why don't you come with me? And why don't you see what we see? Why don't you see these incredible students? I've talked to them tonight. They're just phenomenal. You have the best trial team in this country. And I don't even think people, I guess sometimes you're too close to something and you're there around it every day and you don't understand what it is you have. And you have got a phenomenal trial team that is a brand that's building an incredible reputation for this school. But you also have Steve Scheller. Steve, could you come up here? And Steve and I have known each other. We handle the same kinds of cases, and we've been handling them together for a long time, haven't we?
A long time. Yeah.
And as I've watched his career, the thing that I've focused on is there are so many attorneys. I call them cowboys, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot. The cowboy is there. It's no longer relevant. It's yesterday's news. It's the cowboy lawyer who, the fast drinker, the womanizer, my plane's bigger than your plane, that kind of. That has always been such an awful thing to me as far as the image of trial lawyers. It has been the biggest, it's been the biggest impediment for us improving the lives of Americans, of so many people. But I've watched Steve, and Steve would be in a room of these cowboys. And these cowboys, well, how big was your verdict? How big is that new house you built in Aspen? And you know what Steve would talk about? Steve would talk about how big is what you've done for your community. And they'd shut up. Because what he's done for his community, ladies and gentlemen, is phenomenal. And when Mark Proctor and I came up here, and we met Dean Epps, and we met the incredible staff. Judge Moss brought us up here, and she said, you got to meet this person. Everybody was even more, time after time, I'd say, my God, that's an impressive person. And it's right up the line. And we got to Steve Scheller. And I want to, for 16 years, many of you know what MTMP is. It's a program that takes place in Las Vegas twice a year. Anywhere between 700 to 800 people have been coming for 16 years in these twice a year. And years ago, we came up with an award called the Darrow Award. It is a very, very coveted award. It really is. They lobby for the Darrow Award. By sending us emails, this is what we did this year. Well, great. Thank you. But we wanted to give it to Steve Scheller this year. And here's why, Steve, and I've never really talked to you about this, but Clarence Darrow was very critical of lawyers. I mean, if you've ever read anything that he's written, he's been extremely critical of lawyers. And he says, lawyers, for the most part, they're not all that creative. They don't read much. They don't create much. But more importantly, they don't give enough back. And Clarence Darrow gave everything back. The story of Clarence, Steve, I don't know if you know the story. The story of Clarence Darrow is he was a young lawyer working for L&N Railroad. And he said, they said to him, well, we want you to handle this case where you're going to represent the railroad against a widow who lost their husband, and they have 2 orphans. And Clarence Darrow walked out of the office and never looked back. He said, what I was doing with my hands and what I was in my mind and my heart wasn't lining up. What I was doing with my hands didn't line up with what I felt in my heart. And he walked away from it. That is Steve Scheller. And if you've seen what he's built for you here at Temple University, it is spectacular. So on behalf of MTMP and Mark Proctor and our firm and everybody that pays attention to lawyers who do great things, I want to give you this award, Steve Scheller. I invite you to come out to Las Vegas and see what we do, and you will meet a lot of cowboys, but you'll meet a lot of Steve Schellers too. And it's a wonderful program.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And I just want to note that this all started, I think, back when I sued Temple. True story, very true story. What happened, and that's how I met Sandy Moss, who's now our executive director, and the world goes round. What happened real quick is that I was a little bit like Clarence. Clarence started out as an ACLU lawyer, and you remember the Scopes trial, the famous issue between religion and the natural science and all that kind of stuff. And actually, Clarence was the first victim, I call it a victim, of today's version of Daubert and Fry. So you know why I say that? The judge in the famous Scopes trial entered an order barring him from putting on evidence of that we descended from monkeys and things like that. And he got very upset, and he was not allowed to put on that evidence in the trial. Trial never got to the end, by the way. The case was withdrawn, and I guess you would call it a settlement like we were talking about today. I don't know how happy it was. But so what goes on, I was representing unions, because that's how I started, representing the ACLU, and I used to, for those of you who don't know, once upon a time I represented the Black Panthers, and I represented labor unions. And this was a time of great foment, and I had this union that was affiliated with SEIU at the time, and it represented the maids and janitors at Temple. The only thing about it that was surprising is that the maids were paid less than the janitors. The main difference was they worked harder. So, in my inimitable fashion, I filed suit against Temple, and the law school at that time, I don't remember who the dean was, assigned Sandy to me to be my assistant. So here we are suing Temple with their own students. And guess what? We won. It was one of the first cases in the United States, as far as I know, might have been seeking equal pay for women vis-a-vis men. And that's how Sandy and I met. And I want to tell you, I haven't stopped, and I'll tell you real quickly. Friday, we had a president of the union at that time, eventually, because we finally decided that we needed a woman president. The union voted and elected Sarah Love, one of the maids at Temple. Sarah's grandson called me on Friday, and this is how the world goes round. She was being evicted from her house on Bailey Street, right near 26th and Cecil B. Moore Avenue here in Philadelphia. Sarah, for those of you who remember, was here in a wheelchair when the center was founded 2 years ago. Well, now she's had her legs amputated, and always upsets me. So what happened is, she calls, her grandson calls me, and she's being evicted. You know why? She lives in a small house, a tiny house actually, and her grandson takes care of her. But it was owned by her parents who died 20 years ago. Never transferred the deed. The house is worth almost nothing. And guess what was happening? The city of Philadelphia had just filed suit against her parents, who were long dead, to evict them from the house, and essentially she would have been kicked out in the street. So, needless to say, I thought of our social justice center. And I realized we have a real serious problem here in Philadelphia. We have elderly and disabled people living in houses. They raise the tax rates on these houses. They should pay her to live there and keep the neighborhood up a little bit. Instead of doing that, they were going to get a judgment and kick her out. I don't know where they would send her. So the way the world works, I decided the Social Justice Center needs to look into this problem because it's a policy problem. It isn't just one person. This is a very, very major policy problem to me in this region. So I was about to bring this up at our next board meeting, and I'm sitting at the table at lunch today with Judge Jean Mayer. I don't know if Jean is still here. Anyway, so what happens is Jean was just appointed to the tax board of the city of Philadelphia by Mayor Kenny. So I get a hold of Jean, and I say, Jean, got a job for you. You're going to change the policies in Philadelphia. No longer is the city going to evict and sue disabled people who you don't have any place for them to go. You're going to give her that house for free. You know why? Because she keeps it up. And you should be pleased that that's happening in the city of Philadelphia. So we're going to look at, I may be wrong about the policy, and I hope JoAnne doesn't get mad at me for telling the judge what he's going to have to do. You know, we just went through that this afternoon. But that's what I intend to do. So thank you.
You are very fortunate to have Steve Scheller here.